Welcome. My name is Ivy Wick. I'm an editor here at St. Mary's Press. Thanks for joining me today to talk about the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. What exactly is Catholic social teaching? I can't even say it. The Catholic Church has a rich history of social teaching that can help us to live positive, meaningful, and holy lives. It's really all about our relationships with other people and our responsibility to them. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into each principle. Some of the themes of Catholic social teaching, which have been documented over decades in church documents, some of them have been highlighted as general themes or principles, and those are the 7 that we're going to talk about today. These principles challenge us both globally and locally. Globally, they challenge us to see the world as one family and to work for justice and peace. And locally, they help us to apply those principles in our daily encounters with people, informing our opinions, in how we spend our time and money, in who we vote into office. So there's really both a large scale and a more small scale application for the themes of Catholic social teaching. The first principle is the life and dignity of the human person. All of the other principles are based on this theme. If we're unsure how to respond in any given circumstance, this should be our guiding principle. And you will certainly come up against that when you are teaching in class, that students will like to give you a lot of different scenarios and examples because they want to see if in any given circumstance, does our application change? So consistently holding to this value gives credence to how we act, speak, treat others, even how we vote. It's a lot easier in theory than in practice. But we have to begin with the belief that all human life is valuable. And consistently basing all of our judgments and decisions on this principle is really the only way to ensure that our decisions are objectively, morally, and ethically sound. So we really need to talk to our young people about consistency. Why is it so hard to be consistent? Well, it oftentimes is inconvenient. Means that instead of going to shop at a big box retailer, that we make an effort to patronize small businesses. It means that sometimes we are going to pay more or wait for shipping, that we won't get everything in 2 days, that we have to wait a little bit longer when we make purchases from small businesses. Apathy is another reason why it's hard to be consistent. A lot of times we just don't care about what's happening outside of our own little circle. And it's that apathy that can really be harmful to others. And I hate to say it, but there's also greed that makes it difficult to be consistent. Our society preaches a lot about having a great job, making a lot of money, how to build our wealth. And it's not that that we don't have a right to be comfortable. We certainly do. But the idea that how much money we make comes before the people who are producing those products for us. It's in the sense that type of greed that causes us to maybe waffle a little bit when we're trying to decide how to apply these principles in our everyday life. Or maybe we don't think about how to apply those principles, and that's the apathy part. So when you start to broach the themes of Catholic social teaching with your students, first you should probably talk to them about what they're saying yes to. For this principle, we're saying that every person has worth. Every person's life matters. Every person's worth is equal. No one has more or less dignity than anyone else. And that every person's equal worth is inherent. Nobody can take it away. It also means they can't give it away. So no matter what a person does, they still have value as a human being. They may not have the same rights and freedoms and privileges, let's say if they commit a crime, but their inherent worth as a human being remains intact. It is not our right to take it away from someone, and they cannot sacrifice it. They can't give up their right to human dignity. What issues or actions are contrary to this principle of the life and dignity of the human person? Here's all the big hot button topics that your students want to talk about. Abortion, artificial means of conception, genetic engineering, euthanasia, assisted suicide, the death penalty, why so many people live in poverty, how does human trafficking happen? Is racism really existing, not only in our own country, in our own schools, in our own families, but worldwide? What does that look like? And these are difficult conversations to have and hard topics to broach. So a lot of people may think that teaching theology is easy because there aren't the same kinds of, you don't have to check your essay for certain grammatical points, or, you're not held to the same kind of box checking on your curriculum mapping. But people outside of your department don't really understand these difficult topics that you are touching on with your students in order to help them really become good people, good human beings out there in the world. The second principle is the call to family, community, and participation. It is important to remember that all of these principles apply to all people. As educators, it's helpful to keep in mind that these principles apply to everybody, not just Catholics. So we aren't just talking about what's happening in your classroom with your students, we're talking about their experience out in the world. And that the concept of family, both modern and traditional, are really at the heart of society. And if our concept of family is broken, society cannot function the way that it should. And what do I mean by that? Well, we learn to be the hands, the feet, the face of Christ for others by having that modeled for us in our communities. And what is our community that we consider family? Anywhere that you are treated with fairness, dignity, compassion, love, that's the model of family, right? Where everyone is respected and everyone has a right to participate in their family and community. How do we participate fully? Well, participation is both a right and a responsibility. So there's these two complementary pieces. Every person has a right to live out their dignity fully, but each person also has a responsibility to participate because the good of other people in their community depends on their participation. So they kind of work hand in hand, right and responsibility. As individuals, we want to act for ourselves. We want to be part of any decision-making process that involves our lives and well-being. And we should have the right to do that. Just like in our families, we learn that. We learn, oh, I contribute to my family, but I also then get a say in how things work. That's healthy relationships being modeled. And that's what we want in our communities. Can you think of an example when some people have not been allowed to fully participate in society? The example that I have here is Brown versus the Board of Education. So there, the idea that schools were segregated and that the students who were going to school in segregated education, that they did not have the same resources, they didn't have the same money being put into their school. And so when our government tried to integrate the schools, there was a lot of pushback because people were uncomfortable. It was inconvenient. It was, something that they were afraid of. And that's oftentimes what keeps people from being able to fully participate. Discrimination based on gender and sexual orientation, wage gap discrimination, educational inequity, housing discrimination. Can you think of any others? So to fully participate, we have to build on examples of inclusion. What are the hard questions that I have to address when we talk about this principle? What are our attitudes about difference and diversity? So we have to do a little bit of some introspective investigation. When we're around people who are different from us, how do we feel deep down? Do we believe that these differences somehow hold a threat or a challenge to our way of doing things? Then you have to ask yourself, do your fears have any basis? So we really have to do some self-examination before we ask our students to do that. And then we ask them to engage in this kind of self-investigation, self-assessment about how they feel about others who are different than them, to see where our prejudices, where our biases, where do we learn those? How do we respond to prejudice that is directed against us? Do we have any concern about the discrimination that others experience? Do we make an effort to contribute to the good of our community? Are we guilty of greed or apathy? That's a hard question, but teenagers are ready to dig deeper and to look at where their attitudes come from. So we have to trust them a little bit and allow them to kind of explore themselves, their biases, their backgrounds, their viewpoints, can really get some interesting conversations going. How can practicing vulnerability help to bring about reconciliation? This applies to us as individuals, but also to groups, governments, and even the church. The third principle is rights and responsibilities. Our human rights come from our human dignity. We have to work to have all human rights protected. So do you see how we're coming back to that first principle about the life and dignity of the human person? Everyone has basic rights, the right to life, food, shelter, work, but we can't reach our potential as human beings solely by existing. We build on our basic survival rights of food, water, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and more in order to have dignity, fulfill our potential, contribute to our community. And that's really, really important, that once we have a basic respect for all human beings, then we want them to live to their fullest. We want them to fulfill their potential. What are some of these more sophisticated rights that we should have in society above our right to life? The right to vote, to participate in our society, the right to freedom of religion, the right to education, the right to work to provide for ourselves, and beyond that, to serve others who are in need. So it's this idea of going not just to meet our needs, but to go beyond and to serve others. The right to life, liberty, and freedom of opinion and expression. Every person is entitled to these rights without discrimination. How do rights relate to responsibilities? Do you remember a few minutes ago, we kind of talked about them being two complementary halves. Rights and responsibilities are reciprocal. While we enjoy our rights, we simultaneously have a responsibility to those who do not. We don't live in a vacuum. Our needs and our rights are not the only ones to be considered. If you are experiencing your rights, if you have them, you also have a responsibility to make sure that others get to experience those rights. The right to vote, the right to participate, the right to be free, the right to choose their religion, the right to speak freely. They have a responsibility and obligation to ensure that for others. The needs of the community are a call to us to ensure the rights of others by taking on the responsibility of caring for them. Where can they find those opportunities? Where can you find those opportunities? In our schools, our churches, in a response to poverty and homelessness, in reaction to accidents or natural disasters. Those are things that bring that awareness to the forefront, that maybe not everyone is experiencing the same comforts and the same rights that you are. The fourth principle is option for the poor and vulnerable. Jesus focused on those most in need. And who are those people? The disabled, the diseased, the outcast. This principle encourages us to look for those who might need our help. So who are the marginalized? There are so many different definitions, but when you talk to your students, you might prompt them by talking about maybe those who are marginalized are those who lack identification documents or any way to acquire them. People who lack access to basic or further education. Those who are marginalized may live in places where the basic infrastructure is weak or does not exist. Perhaps they live in an area that frequently experiences droughts or flooding. Perhaps they live in an area where there's not easily accessible drinking water. They may live in impoverished areas that don't have a stable electrical grid. They may live in remote areas with no roads or poorly constructed roads. That means that they don't have access for importing and exporting, making trade nearly impossible. People who live in these areas also tend to lack employment opportunities. So what keeps the marginalized down? I mean, a lot of people just say, well, they should just work harder, get a different job. They should move. But that's not realistic. As long as our needs are being met, there isn't a strong concern for those whose needs are not being met. And it's not just happening in other parts of the world, it's happening right here in our own hometowns, in our own country. So creating protections for a basic standard of living is unfortunately not always a priority in the United States. An attitude of apathy and greed cut off avenues for improvement. Let's circle back to that principle of the life and dignity of the human person. If we value profit over human beings, then human beings will continue to be pushed to the margins without their essentials. It takes effort, conversion, commitment, and often funding to bring about change for those who are marginalized. Who addresses the needs of the poor and vulnerable? Well, we just talked about how sometimes our own government doesn't take care of the people who live in our country, and that happens worldwide. So our call is to address both immediate needs and systemic problems. It's not enough to just participate in acts of service. And lots of times that's where we stop with high school students. We say, oh, we had a food drive. That's awesome. We dropped off the food. Our commitment is over. Or we had a clothing drive, or we handed out sandwiches to the homeless, or we helped people to register to vote. And once that day or that drive is over, we think our commitment is finished. But we really need to ask, why is this person in this situation? What has happened in our society that's brought us to a place of apathy and materialism? What is the larger issue at play? How can I address that? Churches and volunteer organizations are covering the gap for those who can't afford their basic needs. Many churches and groups go out to feed the poor, and we should be doing that. However, if the government is not fulfilling its obligation to meet the basic needs of its citizens, how can we assure that they're getting the assistance that they need? Help comes in the form of homeless shelters and community service organizations. Catholic Charities, the St. Vincent de Paul Society, and even individuals who feel called to serve are bridging that gap. Prepare to direct the energy of your students by maybe researching some opportunities available in your school, your parish, and your community for them to volunteer. Task them with initiating a service project. They usually have really great ideas, and the more they're personally invested, the longer they tend to stick with these projects. The fifth principle is the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Work is God's gift to us. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but it is true. We can use the gifts that God has given us to make the world a better place. If we think about it from the perspective, when we say work is God's gift to us, work exists for people. People do not exist for work. So recognizing the rights of workers is one of the ways that we can honor the dignity and the life of every person. When people have dignified work, conditions where they're living improve. Crime and vandalism go down. Community activity and participation go up. And so when we think about work as a gift, because it allows us to provide for our families and help other people, then we can really see, okay, my work has a purpose. What are the rights of workers? There are just some of them here. Workers have a right to a just wage, safe working conditions, the possibility of the worker to participate in the fruits of their labor, the right of dignified work. That means no slave labor, no indentured servitude, not unhealthy or dangerous working conditions, not engaging in work that is exploitive. Workers have the right to leisure and rest from work. It's really important, not just for them, but for you too. Remember that you have a right to step away and say, this is a time I need to kind of recharge. Workers should have the right to sick leave and maternity leave, the right to adequate support in their retirement, the right to form unions and participate in those unions if they so choose. Now, I recognize that some of the details of these principles may not sound very religious at all, but just to know that these are all principles and all of their entirety, everything that they encapsulate is put forth in Catholic social teaching. The church embraces all of these details, all of these supports. What are the responsibilities of workers? We have rights, but we also have responsibilities. Well, workers are responsible for a fair day's work for a fair day's wage. If you're going to get paid, then you're supposed to work the hours that you are required to work and put forth your best effort. Owners, managers, and supervisors have the responsibility to implement policies and procedures in the workplace that protect their employees. That's their responsibility. They have a responsibility to provide a safe working environment and a fair wage. How can we as individuals participate in protecting the rights of workers? It can be really easy to forget the workers who produce the goods that we consume. When we see people, truly see them, it's impossible to ignore how they are treated in the production of goods that we consume. So maybe the next time you're shopping, to think about, where are my clothes made? Where are these shoes made? How much does the person make who, stitch my shoes together? How much does the person make who attached the clasp to my bag? Who makes my skis? Who makes my car, right? So when we're shopping, where do your groceries come from? Who picked your produce? When we start to think about the people behind the products, it makes it a lot harder to ignore the rights that they should have. Rights are violated because of greed or convenience. We want to pay less for everything. We want to make a bigger profit, turn away from uncomfortable situations and conversations. These are all really common behaviors. But protecting the rights of workers means supporting small businesses and fair trade partners, among many other things. We can guard against complacency and convenience by making an effort to educate ourselves and our students about where the products we buy come from and how those workers are treated. So that goes back to the why is it hard to be consistent? Because it takes work. It's not convenient. It's not easy. We have to put some thought into our purchases, put some thought into how we choose to spend our money and how we treat people in the places where we shop. What do young people think about work and workers? Well, this topic of all of the principles will probably strike a chord with the young people you're serving. Employment and working conditions are concepts that have a clear application in their daily lives and the lives of their families. If you think that your students don't know when money is tight or when they have, money that is disposable income, they certainly do. And they understand how hard their parents work or what it means for their parents to have a successful business or how their parents choose to pay their bills. So the idea of work and workers has really practical application for them. The tension between complacency and convenience, as well as the outrage that young people experience when learning about child labor, low wages, and wage theft, the abuse of workers, and more, can be really challenging to navigate. They want to freely be able to spend their money and make money, right? Make a profit. But then when they sometimes think about they're presented with who gets taken advantage of in their low price, fast fashion, or how people are treated in making that favorite pair of sneakers that they want. There's a lot of tension there, and it's challenging for them. It's really hard to navigate. And that's where we find our position as teachers, into trying to be a guide into navigating that. You can be instrumental in how young people perceive the value of money and the price of convenience. You have an opportunity to make a difference by being willing to tackle these challenging topics, encourage your students, and being supportive of their ideas. The sixth principle is solidarity. Solidarity can be defined as unity or agreement of feeling and action, especially among individuals with a common interest and mutual support within a group. But beyond this definition, what we're really talking about here in Catholic social teaching is solidarity in relation to social justice implies that the group we're talking about here is the human race. It's not just some small pocket or small group. We're talking about a feeling of unity or agreement, a feeling of action among all human persons, not just the people who are in our little circle, our little community, our family, our friends, our school, our local community, but this idea of global solidarity. Regardless of culture, race, or social status, we're called to be non-judgmental in our support for one another. The principle of solidarity reminds us we're not supposed to participate in groups that set one side against another. We have to try to eliminate the we, they mentality in our speech and other social communication online, right? All of their social platforms. Under this principle, we commit ourselves to seeking common solutions to common problems in an atmosphere of respectful dialogue. Run into a little issue there, right? Sometimes when we are tweeting or posting things on social media, we forget the respectful dialogue part. And there's a easy temptation to kind of fall into saying things that are not respectful, saying things that are not kind, because we're not looking people in the face when we say them. And so this idea of solidarity, of being kind, of not being divisive, of not having a we, they attitude is something that you probably really need to work hard to make sure that your students understand how that applies, not just in person, but digitally as well. And working for peace in a world that's often filled with violence and conflict is at the very core of this principle. So it's really, really challenging, but I can't think of any reason that is more important since we're in this challenging time to work on this. Did Pope Francis give a TED Talk? He actually did. He's given 2 of them. In 2017, Pope Francis made his first TED appearance. His focus on the necessity of solidarity should really be our calling card. He said, "The future is made of encounters because life flows through our relationships with others. Each and everyone's existence is deeply tied to that of others. Life is not time just merely passing by. Life is about all the interactions, every day, all the people that we interact with. The future is, most of all, in the hands of those people who recognize the other as you and themselves as part of an us. We all need one another." Solidarity is more than just a feeling. It's actually a commitment. When we talk about eliminating the us and them, the we and they mentality, or not participating in groups that set one side against another, this implies we actually have to take action. In understanding that we're part of one human family, the action we take isn't for another person. I'm not doing this for you, trying to make your life better because I feel sorry for you. We're supposed to take action with others because we view ourselves as brothers and sisters to them. So what can we actually do? This question opens the door to let your young people once again take the lead. Plant the seed of solidarity and let them run with ideas of how to connect and remain in relationship with others, both locally and globally. You can drop a clue like linking up with community peacemaker teams, inviting them to seek out creative ways to celebrate the International Day of Peace, which is every September 21st. You can encourage them to participate with their family and friends in peaceful protests, but also to maybe use their social media to raise awareness of justice issues. 7th principle is care of God's creation. The Catholic Church deems care for the earth and all of God's creation as essential to our faith. The responsibility of taking care of the earth's resources needs to be taken both seriously and thoughtfully. Each day, we are faced with choices, both large and small, that can help us sustain our environment or contribute to the abuse of it. We have been given this beautiful and generous gift in the form of creation. It's up to us to care for it and respect it. The gift of creation is given to all of us, not just to some of us, to enjoy and to sustain us. This means we have to care not only for the small little plot of earth that we're living on, but we have the responsibility to care for all of creation. So when we say, oh, that doesn't matter, that doesn't apply to me, that's somewhere else, I don't care about how minors are treated or about how rug makers are treated or about how migrant farm workers are treated, because that doesn't apply to me. That's really not what it's about. We need to care for our entire planet, right? So we need to be concerned about the environment all over the world. Why do the poorest of people suffer when creation suffers? People who are poor generally must depend so much more on the water and on the climate because that's how they make their living. They are vulnerable to any change in climate or environment. So care for creation translates directly into care for our brothers and sisters. Once again, you have to circle back to that very first principle, the life and dignity of the human person. None of the principles carry the same weight or urgency if we do not value the life and dignity of every human person. And in this case, for this principle, that if we don't care about the life and dignity of all human beings living on this planet, right? That's why we have to take care of it. Who is raising their voice to shine a light on caring for our environment? Just going to give you a couple of examples. I'm sure if you Googled it on the internet, you would find 100 more, but these are some that you can talk to your students about. Of all the principles, care for creation is probably the one most closely associated with Pope Francis. In his 2015 encyclical, Laudato Si', he hit a nerve and became the subject of global conversation. In the letter, which Pope Francis addressed to every living person on the planet, not just Catholics, every person on the planet, he shone a spotlight on care for the natural environment, as well as the relationship between God, humans, and the earth. Another example beyond Pope Francis is Mari Kopeni, and she is known as Little Miss Flint. She lives in Flint, Michigan, and organizes water drives and is raising awareness about Flint's ongoing water crisis. Did you think it was over? It's not over yet. Flint is still struggling to have clean drinking water. Autumn Peltier is an activist for clean water and indigenous communities. She gave a speech at the UN General Assembly during which she said, "I've said it once and I'll say it again, we can't eat money or drink oil." And so the idea that these big money making industries, that there has to be a reciprocal piece where they are also protecting the environment. You can provide a service, and in some of these cases, right, oil, gas, all of these things that we mine for, those things are money making, they're revenue generating, but to recognize we have a reciprocal responsibility at the same time. There's a teenager from Kenya who made his love of football, which here in the US is our soccer, into an incentive for environmental action. For every goal he scores, he plants a tree. His dedication to reforestation was triggered after learning about the shocking impacts of pollution and deforestation at school. So here's a young person who decided, I'm going to do something about it. And he tied together something he loves with this movement for action. Another student pushed her government to take action against the climate crisis by launching a campaign called #BanPlasticUG to take on the issue of plastic pollution. For her 15th birthday, Leah planted 200 trees and became an ambassador for Fridays for the Future. Much like Greta Thunberg, Leah has been on strike every Friday since February of 2019 to encourage other young people and adults to take the issue of plastic pollution seriously. So we've maybe learned two important things of all of these principles. Number one, that all the principles, they all fall back on the life and dignity of the human person. And number two, that being consistent with those principles is key. To be consistent is challenging, it's uncomfortable, it's often inconvenient. Think about it this way. Some people who are adamantly against abortion but embrace the death penalty. It's hard to follow a consistent ethic of life. It's really, really challenging. So our job is to guide teens into a deeper understanding of societal issues and the impact of consistency in decision-making, how that coexists with each individual's life experience. This is the challenge for you as a teacher. How can you help people see that regardless of their personal experience with one situation or no experience with any of the situational ethics, that we must follow a consistent ethic of life? It is the way to most rationally make moral and ethical decisions. It doesn't make it any easier or less comfortable, but following a consistent ethic of life simplifies how we can approach social justice issues. Thank you so much for joining me today. I just wanted to let you know that you can check out our new text, Living Justice and Peace, which covers all of these themes of Catholic social teaching. And they're as well covered in the Live Jesus series, Live Jesus in Our Hearts. If you are interested in checking out Living Justice and Peace, please contact our ministry care team or go through our website. Thanks for sticking with me today, and I hope to see you again soon.